Welcome to Urban Legends, and in tonight's episode, we'll be counting down the top 5 scariest poltergeist encounters. As always, we've saved the most disturbing for last. Ardashir Lodge stood on the shores of Loch Ness in the Scottish Highlands. In December of 1952, Peter McEwen and his wife Dorothy moved into the grounds with ambitious plans to turn the land into a working pig farm. The McEwens hired a housekeeper and livestock help, the McDonalds, to assist with their new venture. Mrs. McDonald was known to be sensitive, and little did she know what awaited her. Nobody knew at the time that the house had a terrifying reputation, and in the coming weeks, the neighbors tried to warn them about it, but these warnings were not taken seriously. Time went by, and then it started. The first occurrence were the unexplained footsteps. The McDonalds would be sitting in a room and they'd hear somebody walk right past them, but nobody was there. Cold spots appeared throughout the house in random places, there were loud knockings on the walls, and Mrs. McDonald always got the feeling that she was being watched. There was also an extremely oppressive atmosphere in the house, and unpleasant smells would linger randomly. Most disturbing of all was the apparition of an old woman who could be seen crawling around the lodge. This specter became known as Mrs. Bruin, and she appeared mostly to Mrs. McDonald. The Society for Psychical Research took an interest in the case, attempting to unravel the mystery behind Mrs. Bruin's restless spirit. Despite their efforts, the crawling woman remained a mystery, leaving behind a legacy of fear and confusion. Ardashir Lodge stood until 1968, when it was demolished by the Army. Its reputation as the House of the Crawling Woman persists to this day, and the story of Mrs. Bruin continues to send shivers down the spines of those who visit the site. A teenage girl named Linda Beck lived with her mother Renate and grandmother Lena in a suburban house in Indianapolis in 1962. The home was filled with stress and strife, which may have been a trigger for the poltergeist activity that soon followed. The first incident happened on a Sunday night in March of that year, shortly after 10 p.m. A heavy German beer stein unexplainably lifted from the kitchen sink and launched through the air, shattering upon impact onto the kitchen floor. Both Renate and Lena were in the kitchen and sitting nowhere near the sink. There was then a crash from upstairs, and Lena's crystal glass had inexplicably moved on its own and met a similar fate, ending up in pieces on the floor. The family, who were very shaken, fled to a nearby hotel to stay for the night. When they returned the next day, the occurrences resumed. Coffee mugs, ashtrays and plates began to shatter, and the women called the police. After they arrived, the police thought that the breakages were due to music cranked up too loud, or perhaps a pellet gun, but upon investigating, more items broke and the police requested high-frequency sound gear. By this time, the house was gaining attention and the street became full of curious neighbors. The police, although baffled, could find no source of the disturbances, yet became increasingly concerned when the women came out in bite marks. After that, the poltergeist activity abruptly stopped, and by March 22, it had ended. Since then, the house at 2910 North Delaware Street has remained a mystery and prime location for fans of the supernatural to visit. In the 1970s, a family residing in Thornton Heath in London experienced a series of unsettling paranormal events that lasted nearly 4 years. It began one August night when they were abruptly woken by a blaring bedside radio. The radio had turned itself on and was somehow tuned to a foreign language station. This incident marked the first in a string of eerie events that would terrify the family. Objects moved on their own, chairs slid violently across the floor, and doors slammed shut at night, while strange sounds echoed through their home. A few days before Christmas, the Christmas tree shook so violently that the ornaments flew off and shattered against the walls. In an attempt to alleviate the presence infesting their home, the family invited a few friends round for a night of food and drink. As everybody sat at the table enjoying themselves, a loud bang came from the front door. When a member of the family stood up to open the door, it blew open with a violent force. All the lights in the house went out, leaving it in complete darkness. That night, the family decided that they needed help, quickly. They contacted their local church and a priest performed a blessing in the house, but unfortunately, it didn't work. After that, the entity intensified its onslaught. It began banging on walls, crashing around in upstairs rooms, and a terrifying apparition could be seen in the house. Following the failed blessing, the family was put in touch with a spiritualist medium. When the medium arrived, she immediately sensed the presence of two distinct spirits in the home. The medium explained the spirits were a farmer and his wife named Chatterton. The Chattertons said that the family were trespassers and wanted them to leave. The medium tried instead to get the spectral couple to remove themselves, but they abruptly refused. After 4 long years, the family could endure no more. They packed up their worldly possessions and abandoned the home they worked so hard for. The ghosts got what they wanted, their home back. In November of 2011, LaToya Ammons, along with her mother Rosa and 3 children aged 7, 9, and 12, moved into a house at Carolina Street in Gary, Indiana. Shortly after moving in, the family began to experience strange occurrences. It started with swarms of flies on the porch in December of that year, and they kept returning no matter what the family did. Things began to escalate after that. Heavy footsteps were heard in the basement and Rosa witnessed the shadowy figure of a man pacing up and down in the living room. She also found mysterious black boot prints on the carpet that did not belong to anyone in the family. Later, Rosa reported being choked by a force that she could not see. LaToya's 12-year-old daughter levitated above her bed during a sleepover with a friend. The shocked family could only think to pray until she returned to the bed, and when she did, she had no memory of the incident. The older son was thrown violently across the room by an unseen force, and the younger son would occasionally growl phrases like "It's time to die" and "I will kill you," as his eyes were rolled back into his head. Concerned about this strange behavior, the family's physician, Jeffrey Anyukwu, visited the house. He noted their behavior as delusional. Somebody from his office contacted the police, and the children were taken to hospital. The older boy was calm, while the younger boy screamed and thrashed like an animal. In 2012, the DCS got involved. Initially, they believed that the children were performing for their mother. However, as the investigation continued, they compiled nearly 800 pages of official documents detailing the strange occurrences inside the home. Sensational stories circulated in the media, including claims that the youngest boy walked up the wall backward in front of DCS personnel. Police Captain Charles Austin initially believed the case to be an elaborate hoax, but after witnessing numerous paranormal activity in the house, he became a believer. The family hired Father Michael Maginot to help them. He interviewed each family member and concluded they were tormented by demons. He conducted 3 exorcisms, 2 in English and the other in Latin, on LaToya Ammons. After the exorcisms, the Ammons family moved to Indianapolis in 2012, and the hauntings stopped. In August of 1977, Peggy Hodgson called the Metropolitan Police to her home in Enfield, London. She reported witnessing furniture moving on its own, and the children heard loud repetitive knocking sounds on the walls. The children involved were Janet and Margaret. The police arrived and Constable Carolyn Heaps witnessed a chair wobble and slide but couldn't determine the cause of the movement. Since no crime had been committed and there was no intruder inside the house, there was not much else they could do. Over the next 18 months, a media frenzy engulfed the Hodgson home and more than 30 people, including paranormal investigators, journalists, and neighbors, reported poltergeist activity. Disturbingly, Janet Hodgson would routinely talk in a terrifying gruff voice, which identified itself as a Bill Wilkins, who claimed to have died inside the house. Upon investigation, it was discovered that William Charles Lewis Wilkinson did indeed die in the Enfield residence at 284 Green Street. He was 61 years old when he passed away. Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair, who were members of the Society for Psychical Research, became heavily involved with the case. They reported continuous whistling and barking noises coming from Janet's direction. Playfair in particular believed the paranormal activity was genuine, but occasionally doubted the children's veracity. In 1978, Ed and Lorraine Warren traveled to England to investigate the case. During their stay, Ed Warren was reportedly physically pushed to the floor by an unseen force, and Lorraine Warren felt an overwhelming sense of a demonic presence inside the house. The Warrens believed that the phenomena were due to a demonic presence rather than a mere ghost, as others speculated it to be. Critics Anita Gregory and John Beloff were unconvinced and found evidence that the girls had faked some of the incidents. Stage magicians from the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal criticized paranormal investigators for being credulous while also identifying elements of a hoax. The Enfield poltergeist attracted extensive press coverage in British newspapers and has inspired books, television documentaries, and was the center of the Conjuring 2 movie, which detailed Ed and Lorraine Warren's involvement in the case. That concludes the top 5 scariest poltergeist encounters. Do you believe in this phenomenon, and have you had an experience with it? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos, turning on all notifications.